Hello, and welcome to our webinar, Bridging the Reading Gap with Bookshare. We are excited to have each of you here today, and thank you for taking the time to join us. My name is Vanessa Lombardo, and I am an outreach coordinator with Bookshare, and I will be moderating our event. Today, we will be listening to a conversation with Megan Shanley, an assistive technology specialist and occupational therapist who uses Bookshare in the Albuquerque Public School District in New Mexico. Enjoy. Again, welcome, Megan, and thank you so much for being here.
Hello, it's wonderful to be here. I love this topic, so I'm always excited to talk about it.
Wonderful, and we are excited to have you. So Megan, first, can you tell us a little bit about your district as a whole, and what are some of the demographics that are important for us to understand?
Oh, yes. So Albuquerque is a very unique place. And our district is 80,000, and it's often labeled as an urban district, but we're actually one of the largest square footage districts in the nation. And so we have 1,200 square miles of coverage. So we have everything from rural and reservations to deep urban down in downtown Albuquerque. So it's very unique district. So we also have a huge amount of diversity. So we have a lot of different languages that are spoken at all the schools. And my schools in particular that I work in are 90% and above and free lunches. So that means that we have a lot of social challenges for our kiddos. So.
Absolutely, certainly, as you said, many different things going on to manage and to make sure you're getting through all of those different things. But that's helpful, that kind of framework for us to understand your district. So tell us a little bit about the work that you do at Albuquerque Public Schools.
So I've been with Albuquerque Public Schools for almost 22 years now. And I'm an occupational therapist by trade, but also an assistive technology practitioner. And I've worked as an AT specialist. I've also helped form a UDL team, which is Universal Design for Learning, which is kind of an outreach team for all of this stuff. And right now I'm working at two schools, an elementary school and a middle school, as an occupational therapist. So it's been kind of a diverse career over the last 22 years. So
great. Talk about some of the students that you work with that have different reading barriers. And again, how do you support them as they're going through their goals?
So we have 14,000 students with special ed needs in our district. So we have a really wide and diverse population that benefit from eText and Bookshare. And we actually have a Bookshare account at every school, all 144 of them at this point. So the population that we reach out to are anything from our kids who have mild to moderate learning disabilities and who are in general ed settings and just really need a way to access text to stay in that setting, all the way to our students who have physical disabilities, who need to use switches to access text, or who are blind. And these all of these students benefit from this independent access to text, which is really the key for them. So.
No, absolutely. One of the things that you said, I myself have an assistive technology background, but for those who may not be familiar with the term switches, would you be able to explain that a little bit, just for those who may not be as familiar?
Yeah, totally. I actually have a switch here. From one of my kiddos. So this is a switch, and sometimes people use it with their heads, their feet, their hands. This one is actually a brown bear book. And then we attach the switch to the computer with an interface. And this allows our students who can't turn pages with a mouse or arrow key to be able to access it and really give them a lot more interaction with that book, much more independence.
Absolutely. And pushing that independence and really seeing what the students are capable of on their own and giving them those opportunities is so important. So that's really great. So thank you for explaining.
Oh, not at all.
Absolutely. So how did you learn about Bookshare? And then why did you think that it would be a good support for the students that you work with?
So I actually am dyslexic, and I was diagnosed at 15, and I'm pretty old. So it was back in the day where everything was on 4-track tapes, or you had to have somebody sit next to you and read to you all the time. And even as I was going through college, I would get these huge boxes of books of, hundreds of 4-track tapes, especially while I was going through OT school. And they were really hard to access. It was difficult for me to find the pages I needed. And I'm a person who really needs to see things while I'm hearing them and interact with them. And just hearing them through my ears just was not effective for me. And it took a lot of runtime because a lot of the books that I needed weren't books that other people needed. And so I had to ask months ahead of time to have them read onto tape. So finally, I was so excited to find Bookshare. And in Bookshare, I could actually download that book. I could see the text. I could have it highlighted. I could change the visual settings to help meet my needs. And for me professionally, the most important thing was annotating on top of it now. So I can really kind of interact with the book. And actually, I just downloaded a book for myself for a reading group that I've just joined about universal design for learning off Bookshare, so I can really participate in this reading group. So for me personally, it's really important. So I know how important it is for my students. I've seen how important it is for a lot of my students to be able to not have somebody sitting next to them, reading to them all day, being able to choose what they want and choose something at home at night that they're interested in and not have to depend on a teacher to kind of spoon feed it to them. It's crucial, I think, for self-esteem and empowerment as well as just literacy skills. So.
Oh, absolutely. And thinking, of course, that independence that they'll take with them, not only in K-12 environments, but also, of course, into the workforce, as you were talking about with your own experience, to really giving the students those opportunities. So that is really, really important.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Tell us about some of the barriers that your students face in obtaining their instructional materials. I understand you were going back to the building, but obviously when people are at home, talk a little bit about some of that difficulty that the students may have in terms of obtaining the instructional materials.
So it's been a challenging year with all of the different settings that we've been dealing with. Yes. And I think back a year ago and some of the outreach we were doing to schools and parents about Bookshare and all of our digital tools in our district. And we were just starting to try to reach out to parents. We had done years of outreach to teachers, and there were a lot of students who are really great advocates for Bookshare, but we had not trained parents well enough when we, surprise, were 100% at home. And that was a real challenge for us because although we had this wonderful support system of teachers that knew how important Bookshare was, the parents were not the ones downloading the books and helping the students. And we had some students who could do it independently, but then brand new teachers in the fall that they had never met and didn't know how to assign books. So that has been one of the biggest challenges, as well as just the diversity of devices that we had out there and the lack of Wi-Fi sometimes. So being able to have options to be able to download a book at a centralized location and then keep it on a device and interact with it offline was really important too. So that's been a lot of the education that we've been doing as well. So.
Absolutely. And some people had written into us kind of talking about some of those same types of things. So that's interesting to hear, that you were able, like you said, to access the books and then use them offline for a student who may be having some difficulty with internet access. Absolutely. So another question that was sent into us ahead of time: how have you been able to connect with students in a virtual world and getting students engaged in reading while they're working remotely? And of course, again, transitioning, back into school for at least part of the time.
Well, in a way, as an AT practitioner, the COVID transition has also been a little bit beneficial in helping us let teachers understand how important accessible text is. Now that students are not just book bound with papers and pencils, a lot of our tools with text to speech and word prediction, speech recognition are being used more often, which is amazing. So we really have been trying to let the kids know how to use these tools, especially with Bookshare and their downloaded textbooks. We also have a really large second language or first different language population. And Bookshare has a lot of Spanish language, Arabic language books that we've downloaded. But we also have a translation tool through Snap and Read that we use in our district with English language books from Bookshare, which has been extremely helpful as well, not just for the students, but for the parents to allow them to access the text if they are not fluent in English currently. So.
Yeah. Absolutely. And again, obviously being at home and the parents potentially being that primary support or another family member, again, who's in the same type of situation. So that's very helpful to know too. We talked a little bit about, what types of devices, but what, when students are at home, what type of devices are they using to access Bookshare? And then again, when they are in the district, physically present, what types of devices does the district provide in terms of accessing Bookshare books?
So almost every student in the district was sent home with a device as of the fall of this year, mostly in the spring. A lot of them were Chromebooks. And for the elementary school, some of them were iPads. We used to only use the Bookshare web reader, which is wonderful and easy to access and just with one button push. But like you said, with Wi-Fi issues, that sometimes is not a possibility. So we've used a lot of phones and devices as well, so that kids can actually download them onto their home devices through like Dolphin Easy Reader, which is a great app that's free. And then they download the book, and I don't know how they read on these tiny screens, but they love it. And that's been really helpful. And we've also taught them how to download the books as a Word document or as a document they could put on Google Drive on an offline mode. So that's been really helpful too. So.
Yeah, I hear you when you're talking about reading on a screen. I really don't like to read on my phone either, because I find that it is, too small. But, the video that we saw in the beginning, having books read in ways that work for the students, if the students want to read on their phone and that is accessible to them, obviously we want to have that as an option. So again, just reading in ways that work really for each individual person to really get at the content and, obviously increase their learning as they're going through. So that is good to hear. Another question that was brought up prior was talking about getting fellow teachers on board with Bookshare. So maybe a teacher who isn't familiar, how in your district did you get more and more teachers to be able to understand and use Bookshare to help their students?
I mean, that's always a challenge, just because teachers have been so overwhelmed by so many new curriculum, so many curriculum tools, especially in this last year, everybody has been super bombarded. So, Bookshare has made so many great changes in the last few years to make it so much easier to assign books. And so that has really helped us convince teachers that, look, if you just add your kid on this list and they're one of these qualifying kiddos, then they already have, and our district has already gone ahead and pre-assigned reading lists that are kind of general lists, like the National Librarian Association list. We put as a standard reading list for all the kids as they first log in. So at least they have access to those even before they get permission from their parents. So that has been really helpful to kind of make it as easy as possible, as ready to go as
Mhm.
needed. And then just the fact that these kids are at home and oftentimes they had someone sitting next to them and helping them, and they're in desperate need of some of that assistance in a home environment, especially when the parents are teaching 3 or 4 kids at the same time.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that's been helpful as well. So
Absolutely. And also, would you say, maybe a student, again, thinking about that independence and advocacy skills, have you seen your students who maybe would say to a teacher, hey, I've used Bookshare in the past, can I use it again? Have you seen some of that again in this environment where, the maybe the resources are a little bit different?
yes, we get a lot of that now. It's amazing.
Mm.
Students are at one setting in the elementary school, they go to the middle school, and all of a sudden they're like, "Where's my Bookshare, Miss? You have to get my Bookshare for me." And then we often get outreach from teachers saying, "Bookshare, I'm not familiar with this. How do I get it?" And
Mm.
once it's part of the culture, then it really becomes important for everyone to kind of know that it's there, know that it's a good tool. And the kids really are part of that cultural change. If it's not part of the kids' toolbox, then yeah, it's hard to get it to transition effectively from level to level. So.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. Um, One other question that was sent in, and this is really focused on pre-K to second grade. What kind of tips or resources, strategies, could you provide for supporting, English language learners in that early elementary stage? So can you talk a little bit about, I know you work with students of all different ages,
Yeah.
but talk about that group in particular.
Definitely. I mean, it definitely doesn't automatically translate to some of the books that you get off of Bookshare. Sometimes you need something a little bit more dynamic and interactive for a kid who's just developing their motor skills and their language. And so what we've done is we've taken the books, because Bookshare isn't just an interface, it's a library. So
Mhm.
we take those books and we do just little adaptations, like we put a page on each of a PowerPoint page. And so then they can use the switch and turn the page with the switch.
Mhm.
We can also record our voices reading it to make it a little more interactive. And as you saw before, I had brown bear on here. So oftentimes we'll have kids hit the switch, brown bear. And then we follow up with the next line, and they get to see the PowerPoint page and turn it. So anything to make it interactive, multi-sensory. Whoops, I'm sorry, I accidentally hit it. So
That's okay.
anything to make it really interactive and good. And there's also this great reading list that we give our preschool and kindergarten teachers off of you guys' websites. That's picture books. And they're
Mhm.
already just in a wonderful format. So yeah, we kind of use the tools to make it interactive and independent. So
Mhm. No, absolutely. And Laura will be walking everyone through that hands-on demo part and really talking about, how to find books and
nice.
kind of looking around the websites. You're kind of giving us some good nuggets as we're going to move into that part in a little bit. But this was great. Thank you for all that information. We would like to open up the floor. We do have a few minutes for any questions from the audience. You can, again, put your questions for Megan in the Q&A box. And again, if you've submitted a question, we will do our best to get to as many as we can in this portion of time. I'm just going to take a quick look. Okay, great. So here's a question from Bernard. Please explain the criteria for students to access Bookshare. So that's great. I'm happy to go through that. So students have to qualify in one of three key areas. So they are a student with a learning disability, a student who has a visual impairment, and a student who has a physical disability that impacts the way that they would access with standard print. So as long as you're working with a student who has a disability in one of those three categories, then they would qualify for Bookshare. All right, great. Another question, is Bookshare available to students who are English language learners, but who do not have a reading disability? So I know I sort of kind of answered that question prior. So they do have to have a disability in one of those three categories. But Megan, you had talked a little bit about, again, students who are, using Bookshare when their first language is not, English. Has that been difficult? Kind of talk a little bit more maybe in regard to that specific piece of Bookshare.
Yeah, what we find is that a lot of our students who have a learning disability in English and who have been tested and actually have that disability label are also struggling in their original language as well, because it's often a processing issue and not, or a visual perceptual issue and not just a language issue, right? And so even some of our students who look like they have a high level of mastery of English sometimes prefer to listen to some of the books in their native language. And that helps them understand it at a deeper level. And that's great as well. So, a lot of the things that are helping in Spanish are also helping in English or, in Arabic or, any of the multiple languages that our district has. So.
Absolutely. And as you said, you have many students who do fall into that category, certainly. All right, great. Looks like maybe one more question, and then again, we can certainly answer the questions, just by typing in the answer. So in terms of, Kathy had written, what type of documentation does Bookshare require to qualify a student as having a reading disability? In terms of that, we're leaving it up to the school. So whoever is working with the student and the student is providing documentation to receive services through the school district. And then you are telling us, yes, this student has sent through their documentation to the school. And so we are providing those services or those accommodations. And so therefore, then you are telling us, yes, that is, the case, again, in one of those three categories.
Do we have a second to?
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I just saw Bernard had a question and I was just wondering if there was 3 seconds to answer that one.
Absolutely. Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Because I was excited about that one.
No, that's great. The question is that Bernard asked, is there a way to lock the Bookshare application so students are not surfing the web instead of reading? Good catch, Megan. I didn't see that all the way up.
So that's something I deal with all the time. So
I'm
even
sure.
with myself. So I prefer, there's a app called Voice Dream that I absolutely love on the iPad that I use personally and recommend to a lot of kiddos too. And it's because it's on an iPad, I can even use guided access to help the student remain within the boundaries of the book itself. And so there's a lot of different tricks that you can use to allow them to just focus in on that book and not kind of spontaneously jumping out and researching something else or just getting off task.
Yes, right. Get off task, as probably all of us have been guilty of, certainly from different parts. But right, that guided access on the iPad is specific to the operating systems. Within settings, you can set that up. And again, same thing, we could obviously go into that at a different point, but that is really good because of course, students, they get distracted.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Megan. This was very helpful just in terms of answering all of these questions. So thank you so much again. We really appreciate your time. All right, wonderful. Well, again, thank you everyone so much for attending. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And thank you for spending some time with us. Take care.